I'm Jyoti Parikh, Executive Director of Integrated Research and Action for Development, and we work in the area of energy, environment, climate change, and several other things like urban development, poverty and gender, and many more issues. And we work in the policy space, techno-economic analysis, and so on. The subject of financing energy transition, I would like to cover it in just a few introductory comments. First about energy transition, then also financing it, and then the role of think tanks. Of course, think tanks have been there all along doing the techno-economic analysis and you know, pushing the frontiers of energy transition by doing multi-stakeholder analysis, bringing stakeholders together, and so on. Recently, I was in Berlin for this T20 event, and there Paris Agreement was seen to be the one which led to the fall in solar prices, and certainly all the climate negotiations see hundreds of think tanks lobbying around there about whether it's climate change, whether it's equity issues, whether it is a need for different lifestyles, energy transition, and so on. So now when we talk about energy transition, I was in the IASA Integrated International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. It's in Austria. And we were working on this issue as far back as in 80s. And the issue was, how long does it take to make a transition? And they had done some work over centuries. How long does it take to replace horse carriages and introduce bulbs and so on? And used to be something like 100 years, especially after the innovation, whether it can be, you know, solar photovoltaic, invented by Einstein in 1911. He got the Nobel Prize for that, not for relativity. And now, after 100 years, we see some big progress after that. So it does take a long time, sometimes to get the first 1%, that's the crucial part. And after that, it takes off depending upon the market forces. And luckily, we have now entered a phase in which the market forces are now favoring solar energy and renewable energy. And in a way, we were saying this for a long time, that you need support of this for it to acquire certain percentages, but after that, they should have the life of their own and should just not be required special financing. Now, in terms of financing, the other thing is that when you talk about energy transition, it's not just about coal and solar and so on, but it's about many other sectors, lifestyles, and so on. And for example, electric vehicle, it's also leads to energy transition, and it has something to do with transport policies. Also, buildings, how we construct buildings, how we manage, how we live in them. So these are not necessarily issues of coal versus solar or anything like that, but very much cut into lifestyle and so on. So we feel that international, national, local, state level, local, at all levels, you need support from think tanks. And international think tanks have done a lot in keeping the climate change issue alive. And so are the local think tanks now taking issues with the and supporting people to promote this more. Energy financing is also something that required big change in bankers' perspective, corporate perspective, who only had the, the profit, immediate profit, short-term profit was their Bible, and they to think beyond that in a long-term perspective, 20 years, 50 years, and 100 years and more is a job of think tank. And if we are here today, I think we have something to thank many other think tanks which played a big role in this issue, as well as experts and so on. So with this background, by the way, we also need, for the developing countries, a lot of leapfrogging is needed. And the leapfrogging, because we have not yet gone into a large energy consuming per capita. Our energy consumption is, let's say electricity is 500,000 or 1,200 units per month, per year, whereas the world would be something like 3,000, and developed country would be 7,000, 10,000, depending upon you choose Germany or US and so on. So we have a long way to go, and that is why leapfrogging such as LED bulbs and so on. There are now many people without electricity, but it's possible to give them electricity with these new bulbs, which cost, which require 1/5 of the energy. So these are technology transition issues which pervade vast landscape, and we should look at vast landscape to pursue the area of energy transition. So with this background, I would like to turn to my colleagues here on the dais, and maybe I ask you, Mridula, Bharadwaj.
Yes. Hello everyone, I'm Mridula from Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. We are, as I said earlier, we are a Bangalore-based organization and recently started a Noida Center. So talking about energy transitions, since the theme is that financing energy transitions, I would like to start from where do we need to transition to. So in my opinion, I think the state that we want to reach, it should satisfy 4 criteria. Number 1, energy access to all is the objective, and that includes the clean energy as well as the clean cooking fuel. The second criteria is the energy generation should be environment friendly, and that's where we talk about the pollutants as well as the greenhouse gases. And number 3 is the energy efficiency. We should adopt the energy efficient processes so that the demand is reduced. And the fourth and the final and very important one is energy security, so that we reduce over-dependence on imports. So with those 4 criteria, let's ask a question. Say for instance, in conventional, the trend has been, understanding has been that we burn more fossil fuel, more like oil and coal to generate more energy, so that energy access to all is achieved. And conventionally, the understanding has been that if you go for the clean technologies, then it incurs a lot of cost. But if you see the present scenario and the way solar prices especially has come down, the understanding now has to be revisited and realigned with the current scenario. And that's where it's important also to mention or highlight that now, as compared to 5-10 years back, we are operating in a more stringent environment and pollution control regulations. So it's not that the coal, the energy from the coal is going to be the same, because recently government has introduced more stringent norms in terms of emission. Again, the particulate matter, NOx, SOx, including from the coal plants. So we did some, in fact, we are doing some internal studies in C-STEP where we have reached a ballpark number that if you go by the recent, these more stringent emission control norms, then the coal, the price of energy, the cost of energy from the coal is going to be much bigger than what it is now. And in fact, it's around 80 paise per kilowatt hour increase that we have analyzed. So that brings the price of the energy from the coal to around 4 rupees per unit. And that's where the solar and wind sector energy becomes more competitive. So now we are talking about not following the the heavy carbon pathway, but low carbon pathway, which is still cost effective, but not by preventing lot of extra costs that earlier conventional understanding has been. And that's where I want to mention that for instance, if you see the price drop in the renewable technologies, that's mainly because of the business models or the financing that has gone into getting to that cost. Say solar, for instance, it's not that we are talking about perovskite or some other kind of emerging technology which are much more efficient than the currently used silicon-based polycrystalline silicon-based technology. It is actually the low interest rate or these kind of financial models which have come to help the solar sector come down to this cost. And that's where we talk about government investments in the enabling infrastructure that Dr. Parikh also briefly mentioned. And that's where we talk about investing or financing the enabling infrastructure, say for instance, by investing in, like Dr. Parikh mentioned about electric vehicles, the emphasis should be, for instance, on how to finance the charging infrastructure layout in a city where you are expecting a large EV fleet penetration. And that's where we need to talk about or think about the waivers in terms of road tax to the electric vehicles, or waiving off the tolls at the toll plaza at the highways, or waiving off the VAT or reducing the VAT. That's what we should be concentrating about, and I'm sure the policymakers are thinking about a lot in that direction. And thirdly, I wanted to mention that this is the time when, instead of like it happened in the silicon case in solar sector, that we are running behind some technology which has been very mature elsewhere, and now we are talking about make in India using the silicon cells which are not being made in India right now. So this is the time when we should also think about identifying the emerging technology, not only in solar but also in wind and electric vehicle section or battery sectors, where we should really identify, we should have watch groups watching this technology, how they are emerging, and then try to think if we can take a lead in Make in India manufacturing sector. And again, talking about Make in India, like for instance, I wanted to mention about a lithium battery. I have a background in battery, and that's why I'm giving that example, that lithium battery we don't make in here. We buy cells from abroad and make the modules, and as you know, lithium batteries are used extensively, not only in electric vehicle, they are the only type of battery used, but also for the utility scale solar park, where a lithium battery are front runners, and of course portable computers and everything has got lithium. So we need to think about, if we want to make in India, that for instance, setting up, say for 50 gigawatt hour, 100 gigawatt hour lithium plant, what is the capital expenditure? What is the operating expenditure? What kind of incentives you need to ask the state or this, the center government? So these are the things I thought will be important in terms of financing the emerging transitions. Thank you.
I think the question of internalizing environmental cost is a very important issue, and so is the storage. As soon as the storage prices come down, you are likely to get a second boost to the renewable energy, which currently is already competitive. So may I ask now on this side of the table, Sharma, to continue the discussion.
Thank you. Still that on? Yeah. The focus is, I don't want to make this, given that this is sort of a more general audience, I don't want to go into sort of the technical nature of how we want, of the problems facing financing for climate adaptation, and mitigation. I just want to talk about what the nature of the problem is, and then what the problems and promises of the partnerships that you can build up within and across sort of intellectual fields and think tanks and geographies, how that works out. So first, what is the scale of the problem? And let me focus a little bit more on the financial side. We know that of the current flows of financial flows, the capital requirements for climate, about 75% is spent within the country of origin. Now, I want you to think about what this means. It means that if the capital of the world in general exists in the West or in the global North, it is staying in the West or the global North. It is not flowing across borders to the global South. In fact, even within the countries of the global North, it's not flowing across borders. 75% stays within the country in which it is raised in order to be spent, right? So you are typically only financing renewable energy projects, climate adaptation projects, infrastructure projects that are green in some nature within your own country. You're not crossing a border and doing it. And this problem is particularly acute when it comes to the developing world. Only 10% of climate finance overall, or maybe between 10 and 15%, depending on which numbers you look at, flow to the developing world. Right. So the developing world, which is going to have the highest impact and has the highest future costs in terms of adaptation and mitigation to climate change, is receiving only 10% of climate flows at the moment. Can governments or can aid or any of these things make up for this? Well, even right now, when we do not have private flows at the level that you should have, private flows are about 40% of what is being spent. All right, and in the future, there is no chance that government flows will be able to scale up the climate financing to the degree that will actually be needed in order to meet the Paris Agreement pledges, which is 2 degrees, keeping climate change to 2 degrees. And the final problem, of course, is that most of what climate finance is, how climate finance is structured and the projects to which it goes are determined by people in the global North or by people within the climate change field more generally. And the outcome of this is that 80% of climate finance is devoted to projects that deal with mitigation. What does that mean? That means reducing emissions or reducing the paths of carbon emissions. Only 20% of climate finance goes towards adaptation, which is what actually makes an immediate difference to people's lives. All right. So what you want to think of is that a lot of people will put money into renewable energy, all right, be willing to finance that. Very few people will be willing to finance the effects of drought, the effects of changing monsoon patterns, the effects of the need for irrigation and the need for resilience and sustainability to be built into rural living and into urbanization. So these are the ways in which people are adapting to climate change, which will take place even if you meet the Paris pledges, but no money is going into it. So once again, you need to try and work out exactly how to change the financing flows in order to correct these various systemic imbalances in how finance operates in this domain. So let's look at one particular segment of this, for example, which is how can you possibly finance green infrastructure in developing countries, right? So how can you finance not just renewable energy projects, but let's say even urban clusters that are in many ways urban clusters that take climate change and climate resilience as an input into their design. Now, when you look at this overall problem, how to finance green infrastructure in developing countries, it's very easy to miss the fact that you're actually looking at 3 specific different constraints. You're looking at one constraint, a constraint of investment into developing countries generally. You're looking at another constraint, which is a constraint for investment anywhere into infrastructure and other long gestation sectors. And you're looking at a third constraint, which is a constraint for investment into climate-related sectors. Now, which of these three is in fact the binding constraint? Which of three makes the most difference for a particular project or for a particular country or at a particular time? This is not certain. And not only is it not certain, but the answer that you will receive as to which is the most important thing that needs to be addressed, which are the most important regulations that need to be changed, will in fact depend upon the background of the person that you're talking to. And that's where we get into this question of partnerships, and this is why this is relevant for think tanks in particular. If you talk to a South person trained in sort of South-South discourse, all right, then you will say, okay, the central problem is that the global North is not investing in the global South. You talk to someone from a financial think tank or someone who thinks about financial regulation, they will say, okay, that's because infrastructure is specific to particular kinds of political risk. Infrastructure is a long tenure thing. We're not being able to create the regulations that incentivize it. All right? And if you talk to people in the climate change field, frequently it is, other people in the climate change field aren't interested in adaptation. All right? They just want to talk about mitigation. So there are multiple ways in which if you talk, the silos that think tanks and the intellectual world addressing these various problems have divided themselves into already, mean that the answers that you get will necessarily be incomplete or be analytically somewhat problematic, right? And it's not just a question, therefore, of bringing people together. It's also a question of translation. In the field of infrastructure finance for climate-related infrastructure finance, for example, you have two sets of people at the table who will talk about will use two completely different languages. The finance people will be talking about risk and uncertainty and regulations of a particular kind. The climate change people will be talking, will not even understand what you mean when you talk about risk. All right, a finance person talking about risk means about something that can be quantified. What are the possible losses that he will have to take if he is financing something now on the basis of perceptions? A climate person thinking about risk thinks about overall climate risk in a substantively different way. And the language, therefore, is so different that creating a common approach to what is the problem that these people will have to sit down and solve together becomes extremely difficult. And therefore, building those partnerships is doubly difficult in this sort of interdisciplinary field. Now, it's important to note also that you're in a position frequently in this field where good people can disagree because they have different desires for outcomes, right? And frequently for someone like me, if I'm sitting and making an argument about climate finance in a room that is dominated by people who want to talk about financial regulation more generally, there are concerns that I am stepping on what they have already seen as a positive outcome in their field. Now, what do I mean? Basel III, all right, which is something that has already been decided on in the intellectual world that deals with financial regulation as something that is important in reducing the risks that finance takes, in reducing the risks that banks take, and therefore reducing the probability of a future financial crisis, that may be problematic when it comes to increasing financial flows across geographies for climate. So something that is helping reduce the chances of a financial crisis may also be reducing our ability to adapt to the possibilities of climate change, or to the problems of climate change. So how is it that then you create a partnership with someone who thinks that the very field or the very problem that you're working on attacks something that they have already achieved? Again, these are problematic partnerships that you have to develop. And what I'm hoping to hear from the room going forward is what experiences people have had in trying to determine and trying to create partnerships across fields and across languages, and even across conclusions in some sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You drew some attention to the climate adaptation finance And it's a kind of a legacy that has been left by having a wrong fossil fuel energy sources, and certainly has to be corrected and finance has to be available. However, the adaptation finance is probably not making a headway because it is required for unorganized communities who are suffering because of the water shortage, because of the agriculture. They are losing livelihoods. There's so much to compensate for, and how do they organize and deliver a project like giving 10,000 LED bulbs, which is a very simple thing, simpler than this one. So that is the crux where we really need to develop good adaptation projects, and certainly GCF, Global Climate Fund, is not really delivering on adaptation finance, and we really have to make a good case for within India and all developing countries. I really agree with you. May I ask Pascal to carry on?
Hi, this has been a great pleasure for me, and I've learned an enormous amount over the last couple days, and I'd like to make a very quick suggestion, which is what I've heard in this room from Indian think tanks is not what I've heard elsewhere. The perspective is unique and very valuable, and it would be great if there was something like a daily podcast of think tank roundups where, you know, you get to hear 15 minutes of what people from think tanks in India think of current events, and then 15 minutes on in-depth research issues. That would then be available globally, because I think really there's so much talent and thought that isn't getting out there. And on the topic very quickly of the value of retired people, I love working with retired people because they know they can't be fired anymore. So they say whatever they'd like to say. They've been holding it in for 30 years, and now they get to say it all. So I'm going to talk about one aspect of the geopolitics of energy transitions and the unique role of India, potential unique role of India in that context. And I'd like to do that by telling you a bit of a story. And the story has three characters. So the first character is the Kingdom of Tonga in the South Pacific. The Kingdom of Tonga is an independent country, completely independent, never colonized. It has 100,000 people, 99% literacy, and it's represented at the table by one of the newest think tanks in the world, the Royal Oceania Institute. And it's been a very interesting road that they've tried to hoe when it comes to energy transition. It came to the fore in 2008 with the global energy price spike, right? It hit everybody, but in a place like Tonga, which is basically 100% diesel power generation, it really hit the budget, the national budget, because of the cost for the hospitals went up, the schools went up, everything went up. So budgeting became extremely difficult. So they put together a plan called the Tonga Energy Roadmap, and they did everything right. They brought in local experts, they brought in international experts. It was very transparent. I became involved because Chatham House was brought in to peer review the entire process. They identified which government ministries had anything to do with energy, which ended up, of course, being basically all the ministries, and put together a council for the ministers so that nobody would feel like their toes were being stepped on. They put together a plan, cross-sectoral plan, not of what development partners were offering, but what they wanted. And in this plan, they also said no tide aid. And it was one of the most innovative plans out there. Very interesting plan. So that's our first character. Our second character is IRADe. So where's our German at the table? No, okay. Who knows what IRADe is? So IRADe is the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's a major, major international organization, and it was been pushed by Germany for a very long time. And Germany thought that it would be the headquarters for IRADe. Okay? And suddenly, out of the blue, Abu Dhabi said, you know what, maybe we want to plan for a post-fossil fuel future, and we want to be the center of renewable energy. So they started with Masdar and all of those kind of projects, and they decided they wanted to have the capital of IRENA, the headquarters of IRENA in Abu Dhabi. The Germans didn't take it seriously. The people of Abu Dhabi hopped on their planes and went to the South Pacific, where there are 14 votes available, helped them join IRENA, or the preparatory committees for IRENA. And suddenly, when the vote was about to happen for where IRENA would be headquartered, the Germans realized they didn't have the vote. And so they called off the vote, and the headquarters went to Abu Dhabi with some technical institutes in Germany. And that was because of the Pacific vote. So the Pacific was in a very good position to negotiate, in Tonga in particular, and the Tonga Energy Roadmap became one of the launch projects for IRENA. A lot of support out of Abu Dhabi for this project. So Abu Dhabi decided also that this Pacific Island vote bank was potentially very useful in other sectors, and they built it into the first Arab League Pacific Island leaders meeting, at which point alarm bells started going off in various other capitals, as you can imagine. And meanwhile, they continued on this renewable energy transition track. So you would think you've got the funding out of Abu Dhabi, you've got great renewable technologies in India, you've got an open and transparent bidding process. So you'd think India would suddenly start to be providing technology for Tonga. Well, they didn't, and that's because of the third character that's about to come into our little play, which is New Zealand. So New Zealand has been, since the end of the Second World War, kind of the dominant Western power in the region. It's part of Five Eyes. It delivers the Pacific for the West, so to speak, very overtly, especially since the end of the Cold War when the US and the UK pulled out of the Pacific. And New Zealand had a whole different plan for Tonga. Tonga's energy system is run by an SOE called Tonga Power, which happens to be managed by a New Zealander. And New Zealand was pushing for a solar plant, a New Zealand solar plant, by a New Zealand state-owned enterprise to be set up in Tonga, called Meridian Power. That's the name of the company. And they wanted Tonga to take out a loan to pay for their plant and then have a power purchase agreement that wouldn't have lowered cost for Tongans. So at that point, the World Bank, the Tongans were very smart. They were like, we can't stand up to New Zealand or any of these other guys, so we'll bring in some of the people who maybe can, like the World Bank. And the World Bank stepped in and said, this is a bad deal. And then calls went back to World Bank headquarters in DC from the New Zealanders saying, what are you doing? You're screwing up our plan. And so what they ended up compromising on was they would donate the plant, but there was still this power purchase agreement, and in the contract we later found there was a transfer of about $500,000 a year back to New Zealand. So they ended up buying the plant anyways. We only found that out. The Prime Minister of Tonga spent a year trying to see that contract, and the New Zealand head of Tonga Power wouldn't let him see it. So you have this incredible push from New Zealand for setting up this sector, and we couldn't really understand why until they announced that they were going to float Meridian Power on the stock market. So they had been using the Pacific to raise the value of Meridian before they went public with Meridian. So it doesn't matter how good your plans are, it doesn't matter how great your financing is, if there's a larger strategic goal from one of the major powers in the region, it's going to be derailed. And this is where India comes in. Tonga is currently facing a whole other challenge now because Australia and New Zealand have encouraged 8 or 9 Pacific Island countries to sign on to a trade liberalization deal called PACER Plus. It was signed in Tonga last week. Fiji pulled out, Papua New Guinea pulled out, Vanuatu pulled out. All the big ones pulled out, but the smaller ones were too weak to resist. And Tonga, and it happened very fast, within 2 months from the declaration to the signature. And Tonga didn't have the capacity to do the analysis. So RIS, who's here this morning, has been working with the Royal Oceania Institute to help them understand the deal and to put them in a better position before ratification to be able to defend themselves. And this is a unique role for India, to help countries understand some of these situations and just to share the knowledge in a way that creates more fundamentally security and prosperity for all. Because what I think with this PACER Plus deal, because being a Westerner, it's always about China. I think that they're probably going to block India from the market, block everybody from the market, but Chinese money will come in through Australia to get those privatized state-owned industries, and then they're finished. So I'm personally very excited to see the vibrancy in the think tank community here in India, and I really hope you can share it with many of other people in the rest of the world, because it really makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the institutional issues regarding IRENA. In my institute, the next person to me is also a woman who worked at IRENA in Bonn, and she has joined us. The issue you mentioned about India's leadership is very important. I have been also told by some of the Africans that we can't adopt German solutions, but if India makes it in the range of 5 rupees, 25 rupees, then we can take that forward. So a large population of developing countries need affordable solutions, and that's where local expertise to bring down the cost matters a lot. Thank you for suggestion. And may I now ask you to continue? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my name is Venkatachalam Anbumali. Call me Anbu, and I'm from IRIA, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. We work for the 16 countries, including India. I think I am the last speaker. It is the last session, and today is the last day, and so whatever that has to be said has already been said, and
between us and lunch.
What I can do, add value, is agree to all this what has been said, and go back to catch my flight at 2:30. But before doing that, I would like to bring one good news and one bad news, and 3 strategies that India can think about it to accelerate the transition. The transition, as Mridula said, this transition is from the high carbon to the low carbon, and this is already happening. I think if you take these investment figures, the amount of investment that is going into the renewable energy and the energy efficiency collectively for China, India, and ASEAN, it is for consecutively for 5 years, it is much larger than that is investment that is happening in Europe and America. So that means this region, and including India, is already on the transition. That's the good news. But the bad news is more investment is flowing into the high carbon sector. For example, coal and oil and gas. And this, if we continue to go in this direction and this magnitude, probably we will be getting into lock-in effect. That means the coal plant that is we invest will be lasting for another 60 years. And then the transition will become much more expensive. Our institute calculated, and for India, for the sector of power sector, transport and energy efficiency, it may cost about 33 trillion over a 15-year period to meet these INDC targets. So this is the magnitude, this is the bad news. Then giving these circumstances, what we can think about it, and then I have a kind of 3 I's strategy, and for India, I think one is the financial innovation. I think this is also Mihir pointed out. And here we have the conventional investment, most of them are coming from the public sector, the governments. The second comes this international finance, particularly in the climate finance window. And third one is the private finance. Here we need to think how we can reverse that order from public to private and leveraging this international finance to mobilize more public finance or more private finance. Here that is where we need innovation and we need more research. We need to convince this private sector, they have a lot of capital and it has to be better. Most of the capital is in most of these transition projects are not commercially viable. So that the transition, that innovation has to happen. Second is the technological innovation, and we do have two categories of the technologies, that existing technologies that need to be absorbed at the sector level, at the economy level. But we do have a problem there. That is currently we estimated there is with currently available technologies, we can target about 60 to 70% of INDC targets could be achieved. But it will not happen because we do have different issues. The primary issue is the trade barriers, tariffs. Here, for example, and we don't have a kind of harmonized tariff structure. For example, these LED lights are the clean coal technologies. They have the tariff rate of about 10%, and sometimes it is 18%. That makes these technologies costly. So here we need to look into it, how we can bring down the cost, particularly the existing technologies. Second is the emerging technologies. Here we need to invest more on R&D. I think that is where that China is doing it. And basically, they don't look for today, and they look for the future. In 2030, they wanted to dominate the EVs, electric vehicles. The Japan is doing it on the storage systems. Here we need to partner with them, and we need to see that is where that is the potential market, emerging technologies will. Here we need a kind of vertical and horizontal cooperation with the other advanced economies and also the emerging economies where the market is. Third innovation, I wanted to emphasize is the policies. Still India is believing in and it's also acting on the regulatory structure, which is also good. But we do have that implementation deficits, and here we need to think about how that market-based instruments could help. Now the China is creating a largest carbon market and in the 5 cities, and they are going for a carbon pricing in the next year. Here we can see that is how the combination of regulatory framework and market could be think of. Here we need more innovations, more policy innovations. I think Mridula mentioned about the battery, and by one single stroke of regulation, and we can eliminate all the rechargeable batteries, all these manganese batteries. All the batteries could be, in the market we can make available only the rechargeable batteries. And the newcomers, or the new buyers of the cars and the motorbikes could be in electrical vehicles. So this regulation can help. So these regulations has to be tied with these markets. This is where that innovation comes in. So finally, these innovations and this transition will be costly, and it can have an impact on the low-income households and the small and medium enterprises. There will be a losers, and we need to think how we are going to compensate for the losers. There are some innovations that is already happening in other parts of the world. Like Indonesia, they instituted this cash transfer program. Before you introducing the carbon tax or the eco tax, we need to remove the subsidies that exist. That is basically they are distorting the markets. So in order to protect, they introduced this cash transfer programs, conditional cash transfer program, which is much more effective in Indonesia than in India. And then how we can bring the competitiveness to the small and medium enterprises. Here we need to do much more. So we need to think about it. And finally, my last point is the think tanks, what we can do. And I think there are a lot of knowledge gaps. I think we need to work on it. And also we need to think about who our target audience are. We always continue to bring these issues into the environmental ministries, or the energy ministries. They are the less in the power stratum, and probably we need to think about another segment of the policy making, that is the financial ministry and the economic ministry. We need to reach them, and we need to speak the language that they can understand. Second target audience we always neglect is the consumers. Consumers are the markets. They can change. If their behavioral change can bring in the private sector and the policymakers. That's what's happening in Germany. They achieved almost 100% of the renewable energy and the 20% of the emission because the power structure, the markets respond to the consumers. This didn't happen in Japan because of their bias towards these regulatory approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So you brought out the issues of financial innovation and also importance of policies, especially regulatory policies. Even China has done promotion of electric vehicles by ensuring that no new two-wheelers will be registered in Beijing. And they've reached up to some 50 million half a billion two-wheelers, I'm told, by IEA. And so we could do this also. And consumers are decision makers too, as you mentioned. So we shouldn't look at consumers as decision makers just as much as the policy makers. Okay, shall we open it for discussion now? Yes, please.
Hello? Hello? Testing? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the speakers, especially Ms. Pascal, for introducing the issue of climate change in the Pacific, especially where we come from, the Kingdom of Tonga. Before I continue, I'll just introduce myself. I am Fafanua. I am the co-founder and chairman of the World Oceania Institute, and it's a great pleasure to be here and participate in the last few days and actually have the chance to meet and interact with our learned colleagues from India and all the think tanks from the region. We've learned a lot, and we thank ORF for extending the invitation to us, and I'd like to acknowledge Manjit from Gateway, who is very encouraging because we are a mere small drop in the bucket, and coming from a population of 1 lakh and living in India, I mean, our country could fit into one of your small enclaves. So from that perspective, I hope that our contribution will be of some interest to you. Cleo's made a very great case for climate change financing in the region, and an example of how regional powers and geopolitics can affect small, vulnerable nations. So Tonga is not only a member of the small island developing states category, we're a middle income country, we're in the lower middle income country, we're a sovereign nation, so our vote counts just like everyone else. So it's very encouraging to know that India is there and that the developments here have the possibility and the capability to make a lot of changes in the Pacific Islands. So talking from a Pacific-centered perspective, we are highly dependent on fossil fuels. And I would like to congratulate and thank India for ratifying the Paris Agreement at the end of last year, because this is a great step towards mitigating against the effects of climate change. And to put things into perspective, Tonga, according to the World Risk Report of 2016, we are the second most exposed country on Earth. Out of 171 countries, Tonga is the second most exposed country, and at the same time, we are the second most at-risk country. And the reason why we're at risk is because of our lack of capacity to adapt to these climate changes. So when we're talking about financing, one of the speakers mentioned that there's a difference between mitigation and adaptation, and Paris Agreement is definitely a step forward for mitigation, but in terms of contributing to the carbon emissions, India is the 4th largest emitter of carbon emissions. It's very encouraging to see that the players and the contributors are actually trying to do their part to reduce the climate changes, because Pacific Island countries are very vulnerable. We're seeing acidification of the oceans. We're seeing more intense and more frequent hurricanes. The coral reefs are being bleached. They're dying. The ecosystems are being affected. Our water levels are being affected because of the salinity of the water. So there's food security, there's water, there's health, there's energy security. There's even the fact that some of the countries like Kiribati are at risk of being flooded and wiped out of existence altogether. So the threat of climate change is definitely real, and we're here to reaffirm that. And we thank think tanks from around the world for taking this issue seriously and for moving it forward. But without the money, without the financing, we can't do anything about that. And Cleo elaborated on some of the challenges that we have in the region, and financing from anywhere, including India, would go a long way for a small country like the Pacific. And so I would like to end there because I don't want to ramble. Definitely, please be in touch with us if you have any interest. We would like to collaborate with you. In fact, we've already connected with some of the leading think tanks here like RIS. So I'll stop there.
Thanks. It resonates with us also because we have also farmers, fishermen, they are all suffering a lot, and some of the islands are also getting inundated. May I ask you also?
I'm Arpan and I'm a research intern at the Observer Research Foundation. Ma'am, you said that in terms of financing, energy transition is not just about coal and solar, but also about electric transition. But however, Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, has raised concerns about a proper market mechanism that can facilitate the open trade of electric vehicles made by Tesla. So how should India shun its age-old rigidities to incorporate modern and eco-friendly technologies?
So maybe we take some more questions and I'll answer that. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
Thank you. So my question is about green bonds. I've been seeing a lot of articles about how they're raising a lot of money, so for BlackRock issued bonds and all. So how do you think that could deal with some of the financing issues that, say, developing countries are facing problems in flows of money, right? Exim Bank issued green bonds for around $500 million in 2015. And I think they sold them 3-4 times. So how do you think green bonds are going to impact this kind of financing?
That's a good idea. There's one more there. Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
My name is Tapan Bharadwaj. I work with IPCS. My question is regarding financing in the smart grid system and the national grid, connecting all the renewable energy so that we can use it. I think the panel didn't focus more on it. If the panel could focus a little bit on this particular area in India. Thank you.
I request panel also to make notes of what they would like to answer. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
Actually, I don't have a question. It's a comment. The day before yesterday, I visited a conference by Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala, who is the principal advisor to Ministry of Energy. And he stated about solar inverterless technology, which he himself has devised. And it was awarded the 2016 IEEE Best Technology of the Year award. And it is that the light that we use is AC, the current that comes in. And the most of the devices work on DC. So we have to convert it again into DC. So instead of converting into DC, he claims what he proposes is to install a converter at the homes that converts it to DC to be used. There is 10 to 15% loss in conversion of AC to DC at each device. So approximately, according to his calculations, disclaimer, I do not quote that 20,000 crores can be saved per year. And one more thing to add, that the AC motors that are used are found to be 30 to 40% less efficient than the DC motors. And the pilot projects for this have been run in Assam, Jodhpur and Jaisalmer, and the government plans to implement in 2018. And another thing that he proposed was swapping. Swapping means using electric vehicles, and there can be battery swapping, since the solar energy cannot be reliable at some times that the batteries get discharged. So introducing swapping of batteries in the public vehicles, so that it is not an elite concept that solar vehicles or electric vehicles can be used only by the elite, so that it is accessible to the lower strata also. And the third is that the solar inverter is technology. It can be implemented at the individual home, means domestic levels also. It is not necessarily that the state has to put up a substation at the Delhi and it will be supplied everywhere. It can be incentivized by the government and can be implemented everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, please.
Hi, I am an intern at the ORF, and I have a question about think tanks and their role in this debate. A gentleman yesterday was talking about how think tanks are the best way to combat fake news in today's world. In the field of climate change skepticism and climate change denials, some fake think tanks that are often funded and people in whose interest it is to not to have any action taken against climate change have played a big role in proving in some way that climate change is fake. Do these fake think tanks pose a real threat in the debate that we are now facing? And how can we deal with them? That's my question.
Okay. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Manjvi Singh and I work with the Center for Science and Environment, New Delhi. So I'm working with the energy group there. So I wanted to share my experience over the past few years. We have been working in very closely in the emissions control area for coal-based power plants. So one thing that we've found out, not just in India, but also in some Southeast Asian countries, that financing and costs are actually a major, major concern. And of course, while there are a lot of issues within that, lack of knowledge with the policymaker has also been a very major concern. Because what happens is that a lot of times the policymaker is not clear on what the true cost of that intervention is, and the industry has the privilege of opposing or delaying the intervention just based on the fact that it can quote any number and the policymaker is not aware at present of what the true cost is. In fact, I can quote an example. FGD is an equipment which is used for desulfurization, and the cost has actually turned out to be 5 to 6 million per megawatt of that equipment. While initially when the emission norms were announced, the industry was quoting double of that amount. So that actually gave them an advantage of saying, we cannot intervene in the area because it's too expensive, we can't afford it. But I think one role that we also played, and I think think tanks can play, is in terms of bridging that knowledge gap. We did our research and we could go to the MOEF and say, like, look, these costs are actually manageable. And that actually, I believe, helped the process. So that's what I want to share. Thanks.
Shall we now go for the panel's response? I would say take up only one or two issues, don't answer all. And you may only just do closing comments, not necessarily answering every question.
Okay. I think rather we can catch up during over the lunch, and but the entire session is about the finance, and I need money and you need money and the transition need money, but thing is how much is enough, and that is we need to have a strong startup, and we need to have more research. And the second thing is all these technological innovations, and these are the innovations, and these innovations need to be transformed into a business model. I think that is very important. I think where the success or failure comes. I think here we need to more focus on it. And third one is these things will not happen in a policy vacuum. I think the government need to create an enabling environment to make these innovations happen and the business models work. This is my last messages, but I would like to be in touch with most of you during the lunch break. Thank you.
A few lines on the EV related questions. The first one was the Tesla versus battery swapping. So I'll just give 2 lines on that just to give indicative answers, and we'll continue over lunch. Number one, the Indian grid scenario is very different than the American. So what Tesla, for instance, has customized for the US context will not go well with the Indian. We need to customize it. For instance, we are doing a study for Bangalore, and we are preparing the implementation plan for the introduction of public transport, the BMTC buses. And there we have mapped out the substation level data. And that's nowhere comparable to the US or California context. Here we are talking about introducing EV charging of which will not be in conflict with residential load, industrial load, and commercial load. So we need to customize that. Number two, the smart grid related question that one gentleman asked. Yes, that's very important because, for instance, in the targets, the rooftop target of Bangalore is 1 gigawatt by another few years, and that's going to heavily impact the grid. And that's where you have to integrate the electric vehicle ecosystem with the renewable energy ecosystem in a city like Bangalore, and that's applicable to anywhere because we have a 100 gigawatt solar target now. And that's where the smart grid will play an important role because that will prevent charging of large fleet of electric vehicles when the residential load is in conflict. And yeah, the third one, just one line on the financial aspect that someone asked about, what kind of financial interventions or policy interventions we need. We did a study on if we can make a polysilicon in India, because everybody talking about make in India and make in India, and we thought, let's do a detailed analysis, and we figured out that the main bottleneck in preventing India making polysilicon is not the cement technology or not the FBR, that's a well-known technology, but mainly it is two things. Number one, high cost of energy and high interest rate. So if you do that, if you solve that and make enabling policy, then definitely we can very feasibly do a polysilicon manufacturing. Thank you.
Okay, very quickly, there was a question about Tesla and I assume market access into India. This is a classic occasion when multiple different objectives of government are clashing. The government wants things to be manufactured in India. It wants protection for Indian car manufacturers, and it also wants to protect Indian retail outlets. On the other hand, Tesla wants to be able to control its sourcing, make sure that it gets all its components from outside the country, and it wants to control its consumer experience just like Apple, so it needs to have its own shops. So even if you want to have a vibrant electric car culture here, and the Prime Minister has said you want an all-electric fleet by 2030, the leading electric car innovator, bringing them to the country flies in the face of other objectives the PM also has. So working out how these objectives can be dovetailed is exactly what the sort of partnerships we're looking for should be doing. On green bonds, somebody brought up green bonds. It's a real, yes, they're doing wonderfully in terms of their numbers. Nobody can tell me what is green about most green bonds that I come across. It's not clear which one is green in what way, when, how, and whenever I see stuff like that in the financial markets, I assume there's going to be a reckoning later on. People are going to be very, very upset that they put money into something that's called itself green but isn't actually, and there's going to be a problem a little way down the line. Finally, on fake think tanks, fake news, climate denialism, actually, climate change is a nightmare scenario when it comes to think tank influence, all right? This is a place where you have an overwhelming consensus that, for example, man-made climate change exists, right? You have an overwhelming intellectual consensus, and yet the intellectual world has been unable to convince people that this consensus exists, right? So this is the number one failure of think tanks in general over the past 25 years. And you have to learn from that at any rate, all right? You have to learn in all the other places where there is maybe not that much of a consensus and you want to put your argument forward, you have to realize that you can never look down on anybody who's objecting to your argument as being clearly talking through their hat, all right? It doesn't matter, even if people sound crazy and are uninterested in facts. Think tanks still have to take them on, or you'll be in the position that the climate world is in.
So as the last one, I'm the one blocking your transition to the energy provided by lunch. So and all these transitions have to happen as fast as possible. So I'm just going to say thank you. If you want to talk to me, catch me during lunch.
Thank you very much to all panelists, and just I would like to support many of the views taken here. Especially, I think we have think tanks do have a role, and I personally think that I've seen with my own eyes over 20 years, starting from Rio to very recently to Paris Agreement. The think tanks have played a very big role in pushing the climate change issue to the to where it is, and in fact brought the reluctant governments on board. Yeah, I think there are many issues that we can discuss over lunch, but let me just thank ORF, especially Samir and Shubh, for putting up this whole show, and I'm very surprised to see so many countries also here. And Jim Megan has been working at it for now more than 20 years, Jim, and it's always nice to see you in India. And when I was in Indira Gandhi Institute, he had written to me about think tanks, and so we've been corresponding since then. So thank you all for participating and making these discussions lively.